Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad to have you with us. My name is Nikki Jogpal. I use she and her pronouns, and I am Executive Vice President at Equity in the Center. We're really grateful to have a couple of our staff, and more importantly, Dr. Raquel Gutierrez here with us today to talk with us about the Practitioner Community of Practice that we are launching shortly. I'm joined today by our President and CEO, Carrie Suarez, Sandra Herrera, our Communications Associate, and Erna Cruz Louis, who is our Vice President of Operations. And if y'all would be so kind as to introduce yourselves in the chat, just drop in your name, your pronouns, and maybe where you're calling in from. That would be great. We'd like to get to know you a little bit. And we're going to have Raquel talk with us for a bit and then open it up for questions and answers. And with that, I am delighted to introduce Dr. Raquel Gutierrez, who is founder and principal at Blue Agave Partners, and who has been a close friend and advisor of Equity in the Centers going back to 2017, I believe. So Awake to Work in part owes itself to you. And with that, I'd love to have you take it over, Raquel.
Thanks. And maybe we can just go ahead and get the PowerPoint up. So we can use that as a guide to move through. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Gutierrez, Raquel Gutierrez. I'm calling in from the territories of the Acamil O'odham and Peposh people in central Arizona. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I am a proud Tarahumara Opata Indian person who is a Chicana, raised in a Mexican-American culture and heritage here in the Southwest. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go through a series of just quick slides to talk a little bit about why we're doing this, the beliefs behind why we're even offering this opportunity, and then do a high-level technical overview of sort of how the pilot project or this project, this community of practice, will roll itself out. And then go into more detail for each of the sessions, because I know a lot of people were interested in that. And then we will open it up for questions. So we want to get to the questions pretty quickly so you guys can maybe even have a conversation with each other if it warrants, if that comes about. So if we can go to slide 2, thank you. So I think anytime an opportunity like this is offered, it's really important for people to understand why is the opportunity being offered and where does it fit into that organization's thinking about how it will influence and inform the field. And so for this particular community of practice, this is about creating spaces for people to come together and build community with each other. And that's fundamentally rooted in people developing their self-awareness, building relationships, sharing resources, and of course, getting more knowledge. And that's like practical knowledge, but also skilled technical knowledge as well. And then we believe that if we can create a space where that happens, that practitioners are going to be able to strengthen their skills. They're going to be able to move through this work that they do as racial equity practitioners with more confidence, and also with a community that they can lean into outside of this formal community that we're creating. And all of that will begin to advance race equity culture. And so that's sort of the why of where this fits in. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, I think I'll just back up for a moment. And I'm wondering if anybody else from the Equity in the Center staff would like to jump in here. If we're good, you can just raise your thumb and I'll know it's good.
I'm good.
Great. So, one of the things that is important to say in this particular juncture is we all know, maybe some of us from firsthand knowledge and some of us just from watching our peers or reading in the field, that we know there is a tremendous backlash right now against people being supported to do equity work. And we believe that one way to weather that storm, to move through that with real confidence and also, I think, alignment, is to build communities of practice. And so this is also an opportunity to respond to what's happening in the larger field. And we know that when the field and the sector, the landscape gets rough, that it's super helpful to have a place where you belong to have a place where you can weather that storm. And so that is the intention, a part of the intention around this community of practice. And I do want to just emphasize, this isn't just about a 6-month group of people coming together. This is about building community. So we want to build it in a way where you can call on each other even after this formal part ends. Okay, now we can go to number 2 or number 3. Okay, so here's the high-level overview. So we talked a little bit about the intention of this: deepen self-awareness, create camaraderie among peers, explore practices that increase your capacity to be an equity practitioner, and develop sustainable relationships. And when I say explore, I mean a couple of things. I mean, one, it's trying out and being thoughtful and reflective about what you currently do in your own practices and how that actually is or is not advancing the things that you want to. And also to do that exploration with a level of intentionality and interrogation that has an analysis attached to it. So this isn't just like, does it work? Does it not work? This is like, what's the context? How are you holding it? How are you coming to the using that practice? What are the things that activate you when you're using that practice? How do you navigate that? How do you manage that? So this notion of deep self-awareness and exploring your practices are really connected to each other. We have the dates and times, which of course are on the website, and the times that they will be held. And while we do recognize that we are asking everybody to be able to attend every session, we know that things happen, life happens. And so we'll set up a process for if life happening on that day at that time happens to you, then we will figure out a way to make sure you're still part of the conversation and that you stay hooked into the get ready for the next session. If people do that, like even ahead of time, I often will ask people if they've done the learning opportunities to, if they want me to share what they wrote, I will bring that into the conversation so that the person's voice and thinking is still present, even though they may not be able to be for that time. And then the framework that we are sort of kind of the spirit, I'll just say, that we want to also, live into here is how many of you, and you can just do like a quick hands or a thumbs up emoji or whatever, how many of you read the article in, I think it was January's nonprofit quarterly magazine that was called Calling Forward? And I don't know if did anybody read that, because it's such, I'll even send it to you guys after, but it's such a great article because it talks about sort of this continuum of calling in and calling out as kind of binary things, and that calling forward is another approach to, oh, thank you, Sandra. And calling forward is another way to think about how we move together and grow together. And so what that looks like in this community of practice, what we're striving for is that we'll know we're being called forward and we're moving forward together if people are contributing to the conversation, if they are completing the learning opportunities. Now, I like to say learning opportunities, and I know for some people what that really means is homework, but I really don't think of it as homework. I think of it as an opportunity to practice and learn. And none of those things that are offered as learning opportunities are mandatory. They typically will not take more than 1 to 2 hours to complete between the sessions. And they are instrumental, though, in being able to come to the next session and as a form of solidarity, having really thought through that, if other people have too, so that you guys can contribute to the conversation and we're not spending time reviewing that. It's also about trying new actions. I mean, one of the things I really appreciate about Equity in the Center is that they have and they have, since I've known them, had a consistent focus to ask the question, what's the new action you're going to try? How are you going to apply what you learn? And so this idea of trying new actions. And then I offer what I call a flash feedback at the end of every session. It's just 5 questions. And they're, rate 1 to 5 kind of thing. That gives me basically a sense of how people experienced that session. If there is other information or questions that they have, then I can follow up with them, or I can put it into some kind of document that is shared with with the whole cohort. If it's appropriate to do that. But having people complete those is a way of supporting me as a person who's facilitating and creating the space for you all to build community. We are going to be offering coaching too. And so for the organizational practitioners, we have 2 individual sessions. For the independent practitioners, we have 2 group sessions. And we want to be mindful and just like transparent around a couple things. One is, I'm sure many of you have had the experience in communities of practice where there are people who are super seasoned and there are people who may be more at the beginning edge of their journey. And so we always will work to figure out a way to honor where people are at in the continuum. I will say, though, that this is not a 101 community of practice. Like, there are working assumptions like racism exists in systems that, we have a set of assumptions that we need people to be at before they enter into this, because we're not going to be spending time convincing people of any of that. That's not what this kind of session is about. That's a different type of session. And I love doing those sessions too, because people get a lot of insight, but that's not what this is. This is for people who are like in it. They've rolled up their sleeves. They've like put their hands in the dough, and they've like are trying to bake something, and it might not be working out the way they thought. One day it might like rise beautifully, and the other day it might just fall flat. And all of that is okay, because what we're doing is trying to figure out what works, when, why, and how. And we're going to do that with love and compassion and grace for each other. And the coaching sessions are an opportunity to be able to dig deeper into that. As a person who has been an organizational practitioner, I can really understand the value of having those sessions, having worked for a foundation and for a national philanthropic serving organization and nonprofits in my local community. And then as an independent practitioner, as a consultant for now 22 years, I understand the value and importance of being able to be in conversation with my peers who have this unique vantage point when they're in their practice as consultants, which is sort of this insider outsider on the edge holding space kind of thing, to be able to get information and share with each other what seems to be working. We'll move to the next slide, which is the last one, and then we're going to move into questions. So just to be clear, the first session will be about setting the community of practice foundation. And that is we're going to be using the Archaeology of Self framework, which was also in that same nonprofit quarterly magazine. It is the 3rd step in the author Celie Ruiz's, Dr. Celie Ruiz's framework on racial identity theory. This is a particular slice of that theory. And it's really rooted in something we all know works, which is it's about knowing your narrative, being able to tell your narrative, understanding your story in the framework of a larger landscape. And that's what that first session will be focused on. And of course, we'll do our introductions and sort of what's driving us, that sort of thing. And then the second session is going to be rooted in the work of Kenneth Bailey, Lori Lobenstein, and another woman who I forget her name, but hold on, I'm going to just get it because I don't want to be disrespectful to her. Okay. It is, I know Kenny and Lori, which is why their names come easy to me. Yes, Ayako Maruyama. She's the third author. And the framework is called Ideas, Beliefs, and Effects. And it is a beautiful framework. If you guys have not heard of it, you can look it up on Nonprofit Quarterly, or you can go to their website, which is System Design for Social Justice, and look at it. But it is all framed as, what are the arrangements that are conscious and unconscious that we have as equity practitioners that we might not even think about, that unconscious arrangement that we have, that begins to determine how we create other arrangements, and what are the beliefs behind that, and what are the effects that it has, and is the way that we arrange doing racial equity work actually having the effect that we want it to have? And if not, let's interrogate that, let's explore that, let's figure out why that is. It is, like I said, a very accessible framework, and it has a lot of applicability. And anytime I've introduced it to folks, I'll hear from them months later, weeks later, that they're still using it in one form or another. And so we're going to use that to kind of really begin to launch into the deeper community of practice around equity practices and creating racial equity culture. And then sessions 3, 4, 5, and 6 are really practitioner driven. They're going to be driven by the participants in the group. So what are the learning edges that you all are interested in? What are the maybe the patterns or themes that keep coming up that are like, oh, this really works, and oh, I've tried this a billion times and it hasn't worked. So it's going to be really driven by the practitioners. We're going to use small group processes. We're using Liz Lerman's critical response approach. Somatic practices. We'll have a somatic practice for at the beginning and maybe the end of every session. There will be things like journaling, both in words and drawing, and I might throw some other approaches in there too. And then the notion of sort of knowing if this is the community for you is to understand that we're creating a space where people can be in solidarity with each other. And when we say that, what we mean is that people show up with the sense of care for the community, care for themselves, and a willingness and a commitment to do the work that's necessary to build community. And oftentimes that means people showing up vulnerable, people definitely showing up curious, and really rooting themselves in not just wanting to be, but actually being a continual learner. And then that they have the fortitude to just be in it. When I was on the Girl Scouts board of directors here in Arizona, I learned this phrase that they use, and you're supposed to say it kind of like at the end of every time you introduce yourself, and it's "I'm in." And that's what we need, is we need people who are in. And so that's sort of the spirit. Those are the processes, and how the content is driven for those sessions 3 through 6. Okay, we're gonna move. Oh, and the other thing I will just say, Nikki, thanks for this reminder earlier on, that this is a cohort approach, and that's done very intentionally. Some communities of practice are created, and I've run some like this, that people can come in and out, and and people just pick up where they pick up, and it's fine. This is not that community of practice. This is a community of practice that is a commitment of practitioners to be in community with each other for a beginning time and then to an end time. All right, so let's move on to the last slide, which is really, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Octavia Butler's quote that all that you touch, you change, all that you change changes you, and that the only lasting truth is change. And so that is what, again, the essence of this session, this community of practice is about. It's about changing and moving with action. and compassion for self and others. So I think we can open it up to questions now. And if you all need us to go back to any of the slides, just say so, and we will get there. Oh, Kemi has a hand up, I think. Kemi, did you have a question?
No, my hand wasn't up.
Oh, okay. I saw a little hand there. Maybe it was my cursor. It was, sorry. Anybody else? Maybe I'd like to know, is this is what I shared sounding what you thought what you might be looking for, or what you thought this was going to be? Just anybody want to jump in, like, no, yo, this is way different, or yeah, like it's sort of meeting what I was hoping it would be.
I'll share. This was about what I was hoping or expecting. I think because I've had limited engagement with equity in the center, I did want to learn more, and I appreciate getting some more context behind the thinking and some of the grounding frameworks that will at least be a part of the community of practice work.
Right. Thank you. Is there any information, somebody just put in the, oh, is there any other information, LaShonda, that would be helpful for forming, that can help inform the big picture, or any more focused picture for you? If not, that's cool. Just wanted to make sure I address that.
Hi, my name's Katie. I'm probably not going to respond exactly to your question there, but I am a white person who has been working in philanthropy for the past several years, and appreciated the framing that this new offering is really kind of coming out of some of the backlash that's being that's happening in the current culture. Definitely feeling that in the space here in Missouri. I am also exploring the Justice Funders Harmony Initiative, which has some similarities, I think, to what you're presenting here. I know in that work there is some specific articulation around prioritizing folks who identify as BIPOC or LGBTQ, and some other identities that that are not my identity, and I totally recognize the need for that space. I'm curious if there are some thoughts in this space, if there is some preferencing for particular experiences, or if this is just sort of we're developing it and we're not sure yet. I don't think I heard that already.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie. That's a really important question. And the work of that other organization is tremendous. I have a lot of respect for the work that they do. And Nikki and Kay and whoever else from Equity in the Center, if you want to jump in here after me, please do, to make sure we're in alignment about how we want to talk about this. When I submitted the conversation to Equity in the Center, to Kay and Nikki, about, you know, offering this, I was very intentional in stating that I would like it to be a multicultural, multiracial space. And the reason for that is, while I agree there is definitely the need and beauty in offering spaces that preference affinity groups. We also need spaces for people to come together and have these conversations across race and culture. And it's an area that I love to create space for. It's part of how I was raised as the daughter of a farm workers organizer. I grew up in the farm workers movement and the pan-indigenous movement. And so that framework of multicultural, multiracial, to shift and change and transform the world, is very close to me. And those are the frameworks, or that's the kind of spaces I like to create. I can do the other spaces too, and I like that. But there's something very special to me about the multicultural, multiracial space. Nikki, Kay?
Thanks, Raquel, and thank you for that super thoughtful question, Katie. I think I'd just reiterate what Raquel said, that affinity spaces absolutely have a purpose, and at the same time, just being mindful of the demographics that we have right now, it's important for folks to have other spaces that complement those, that are not exclusively for BIPOC or through other sort of identity markers. And I think the one thing I would add, because this might just be helpful for others on the call as well, is part of what we loved about the proposal that Raquel brought to us is that it is very much grounded in values. And it's specifically grounded in the values of the Deep Equity Practitioners Network, which we call DEEPEN, and of which Raquel is now also a member. And I'm just going to drop a couple of links into the chat so that you can take a look at sort of the values that were articulated. This is a group of folks from different organizations and also individual practitioners. So folks like Inka Muhammad, who have been in this work for decades, and then other organizational partners also who have individuals associated with them who have a very deep equity practice. And what Raquel proposed to us here, and it is also relevant to the question that Katie asked, it aligns so perfectly with this and is rooted in it, that it is, the multicultural piece is also important here. But Deep Equity Practitioners Network has been meeting now for, I want to say, close to 7 or more years, and they meet about once a month, and very much just sort of see a lot of synergy between that work and what Raquel is talking about here.
Maybe I'll just say this one other thing related to your question, Katie, and I think I sort of alluded to it, but part of this experience requires that people will be doing self-work. And self-work requires courage and curiosity to look at self, and look at self from multiple layers, from the personal layer to the role layer that you have in an organization, to the systemic level of your organization or the larger field. And part of that exploration does have to do with how people understand their own racial identity, all the identities they carry, and how those identities show up in our work as racial equity practitioners, not in a way of exploring it to judge it, but exploring it in a way to understand, wow, is how I'm showing up in these identities working to move and advance race equity culture? And if it is not, then maybe I want to examine that. Maybe I want to try something new or gain some new insight on what it means to be, you know, a cisgender Chicana, third generation activist who grew up in the Southwest in the farm workers movement. And how does that all affect how I show up at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, as an example, to move that to move equity practitioner work or racial equity culture work forward. You bet I'm going to examine that, because I know there's value in it. And I know that there may be things that I carry, my own biases, that stop me from being an effective practitioner to move race equity culture forward. And I have a responsibility in my mind to, one, examine that, decide if I do need to change anything. And then if I do need to change it, work to change it with love and compassion for self. I hope that's helpful, Katie.
It is. Thank you both for that detail.
Okay, anybody else? Nikki, how would you like to move forward? I mean, if I know we have this scheduled for an hour, but you know, we don't have to, you know, wait to the bitter end. But Crystal, thanks. She says, I'm excited by what I'm hearing. Can you tell us about, let me jump that back up. Can you tell us about how you anticipate the application process will proceed? Okay, great question. So we have the timeline on the website, and what will happen is as the applications are coming in, I'm already beginning to look at them, and then we will let people know on the 15th of May, I think, is when we will send out the announcement. We are looking between, I think, 10 and 14 people. I mean, we probably don't want to go bigger than that. Nikki, that's correct? Yeah, okay. And so I'm just reading those as they come in. I will be sharing that with my colleagues at Equity in the Center. I'll make a recommendation. We'll come to an agreement. We'll send out the letter, and then, or the email, and then 1 week, if you're going to be enrolled in the community of practice 1 week before we start. And this will be for every session. 1 week before we start, you'll receive an email that has prep material for you, typically a reading and some reflection questions. And that gives you a week to sort of get prepared for that first session. Is that helpful, Crystal? Yes, great. Okay. You know, I'm open to just, oh, Nikki, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm feeling like you've done a really good job of explaining things since we don't have so many questions coming up right now. I do wonder though, if you could talk a little bit, Raquel, because this is something that I find just personally is super helpful for me. The combination of theory and practice, and kind of how that balances out to your point of the way that EIC is always looking to action and tools and resources, sort of how that, if you could like give me an example, for instance, of what that kind of looks like within the framework that you've been talking with us about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, let me start by saying that I think what is a common practice in racial equity work is that people find information that presents a theory or an ideology, and it resonates with them. And they're like, oh my gosh, this just like, yes, whatever they're saying, yes. And that is really important. What's also important.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks.
what's also important is that we have the muscle and the capacity to always be able to have an analysis around an idea, a theory, to see if it works for us in the context in which we're working, and to be able to reflect on what are the things in that theory that, you know, are helpful for the situation that you're working in. One of the things that has been very present for me in the last 6 months is that as I do this work around the country, and often it's with organizations, I'm doing it for like a year, 18 months, 2 years, is that there's this sensibility that, okay, well, we've got the theory, we've got the values, we have the practices, and things are still hard. And it's still making me suffer, and I want to go home and cry, and I don't feel hopeful. And you know what? Welcome to being a human. And so how we hold that reality of the transformation of human nature is just part of the practice. And you know, on another community of practice office hours call that Erica Hines gave a couple weeks ago for another community of practice, one of the presenters, I think Pawan, is that his name? Pawan's name? Yeah. He and Erica, or they both said, you know, like the Awake to Well to Work is a guide. Like it's not a prescriptive thing. It's something that can help you kind of look at the landscape of change and how you're moving along, and you know, and more of a guide. And I think a lot of people don't handle theory like that. And so I like to think about theory as a guide. Like and also theory is usually coming from academicians and scholarly people, and they've built that theory on something, and then you can build that theory, your theory, on that something. And so I think about the ideas, arrangements, and effects as an example. And that work actually comes out of like some German philosopher, you know, like it's built on decades of like psychoanalytic stuff, but they've made it so it's so accessible, and it's so modern, and it's so like timely for where we're living right now, and how we're moving. And so I'm not like a recipe girl. I'm not gonna be like, do ABC and you're gonna get like, you know, whatever. And so this is about exploration, and that can be scary for some people because they haven't maybe done, or they don't feel like they have the capacity, or maybe even authority, which is a whole other conversation. If you don't feel like you have the authority to self-authorize being critical or analytical about something, then to be able to start making sense of it for yourself. And how one person makes sense of it might not be the way another person makes sense of it. And what I will say is that's okay, as long as it's reflecting the values that that theory represents and is trying to put forward into the world. And if it's advancing race, equity, culture, and practices within the context of where that person or those people are working. What works in Tempe, Arizona, believe you me, like we just passed a bill in our legislature, our Supreme Court, that we are going back to a bill of 1864, when we weren't even a state yet, that abortion is completely outlawed in our state. Like what's going to work here for race, equity, culture, advancing that is way different than what that's going to look like in Oakland, California. So we just have to keep context in mind. Nikki, is that helpful? Okay.
Super helpful. Thanks, Raquel. Other questions from our friends in the space? Raquel, I think one last thing that I think would be helpful. Can you tell us what a community of practice means?
A community of practice is a group of people who are willingly coming together to learn and to want to advance something that they have in common. In this case, it's having a deep desire to want to advance race, equity, culture. We are coming around. That is our line of sight, is the race, equity, culture. And the community of practice is sort of like our hiking club around how we're going to get to that top of that mountain. And we're going to try out a bunch of different pathways to do that. And we're making a commitment to each other to be in that learning together. And so that is what this type of community of practice is. It's an obligation to be in solidarity with each other around wanting to create a race equity culture.
Thank you for that. I think that's important because you referenced this earlier, that sometimes a community of practice can be perceived of as sort of it's almost like a coffee klatch, like you stop in and you don't necessarily have your camera on and you just kind of hang out. And this is definitely not that, right?
Yeah, those are nice spaces for, sometimes, and it is not this space.
Yeah. There's so much intention and care and compassion built into your approach. And I think that's something that at EIC we just value so greatly because, as you know, relationships are central to who and how EIC is. And to have been in relationship with you for several years at this point and to be able to work with you on this offering that really reflects sort of the deep alignment that we have in terms of values and just the strength of our relationship as we continue to build race equity culture capacity across the sector and with individuals is truly a remarkable opportunity. And I'm so excited and grateful that you're doing this with us.
Thank you. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is really useful, and I appreciate how you're grounding this work and letting us know of the frameworks and resources that you will be using to move this work forward. One of the things I'm curious about is, who are you expecting to be the people who make up the cohort? Like, what types of jobs? What types of organizations are they working for? Do you have an idea of what that group looks like and where they're coming from?
We know that one part of the invitation was extended to what we call individual practitioners, which are typically consultants who are working with organizations. So they are not a full-time staff person. They're what I call inside outsiders. They have a unique hand in shaping and informing and creating opportunities for people to transform from where they are at to really holding and operationalizing a racial equity culture stance and practices. So that's one group of folks. The other group of folks are people who are working within organizations. It might be a formal role that they hold in the organization. I anticipate we might get some people from organizations who are trying to be part of advancing race equity culture, but that isn't their formal role. And as a person who was that person within a foundation, that is a very unique and tricky position to be in because it is not your formal role. Might be your informal role, but not your formal one. And we can talk about that at another time, but it has unique things that kind of go with that. And the people who are, it's their actual, like, this is what I was hired to do, is to guide and steward this process. They'll probably be in there too. And what I'm super excited about too is that we're going to have both types of people in the cohort, because I think there's a lot that sometimes people who work in organizations don't hear the what I would call actually like the challenges, that consultants hold in trying to assist and guide and support their work, and vice versa. I think there's sometimes consultants are like not aware of the intensity that a person within an organization is actually carrying the work and the consequences that they are experiencing as a result of stewarding that work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Were you trying to come off mute?
Great. The one maybe final thing I will say, if there aren't any other questions, is what I really want to invite people into in this community of practice is I know some of the names on this call right now, and I have a sense from looking at people's background, sort of like that people are just at different places in the journey. And we are going to create a space that intentionally invites people to the beginner's mind. So information that you hear that might be really knowing, like, you know, like you feel like you know it, I'm going to challenge people to listen with a new ear, to see with new eyes, and to feel with something that might be new to you. And that beginner's mind, especially with seasoned practitioners, can sometimes be a challenge. And in my experience coaching and in doing this work for 30 years, is some of the most instrumental ways of being that allow the work to move to another level. So always welcome beginner's mind, including mine. Nikki, do you want to close us out maybe?
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Raquel, for that excellent overview of what is truly a very special space. And I'm looking so very much forward to how this looks in practice and hopefully seeing some of you there. You are free to email us with questions after this if something pops up for you, and we have recorded this, so we will send this out to you as well. I also want to name one of our colleagues, Sonia Robin, who is not in the space today, but who is supporting Raquel. So should you decide to come into this space, you will be seeing and hearing loads from her as well. The last thing I want to say is that in addition to the community of practice that we've been talking about here today, we recently launched a tool for senior leaders that builds upon the work that's in Awake to Lope to Work. Senior leaders is one of the 7 levers. It's often one of the first levers that folks start to work on. And there are 2 options for folks to engage with us. One is through coaching sessions, which would be with me or Kay, our CEO and president. The other option is another community of practice, which is led by Dr. Erica Hines, as Raquel earlier noted. So there's a link to that in the chat, and it might be of interest to you or to some of your colleagues. And just to close us out again, gratitude to each of you for being here, and to you, Raquel, for coming up with this great idea. And just looking very much forward to seeing you all again and building with you, because community is so important to us. And we hope you each take a little time to tend to yourselves today, do a little self-care, and get a little rejuvenation for the work that I know you're all doing, because it can and is so heavy at times. So keep that in mind, be mindful of yourselves, and we look forward to speaking with you and being with you again soon. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
All right.